Welcome back to the Modern Hippie Podcast. I am joined today by Alex Ruiz, who is an Emmy Award-winning animator for The Simpsons, turned conceptual artist for Avengers, Infinity War, Beauty and the Beast, and Spider-Man Homecoming. Alex is renowned for his visionary artwork for the likes of Dr. Joe Dispenza and Aubrey Marcus, and through his coaching, helps people become the artists they were born to be. And I know you are also my favorite artist, and I am so glad to have you on the show today again.
It's great to be here, Barrett. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, really excited because this is my 1 year anniversary episode. And as part of that, I'm doing a bit of a rebranding. And you were very instrumental in that. You designed the art. You did my immortal portrait that has now become the new podcast cover. So thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, as you guys may have heard in this episode, there's a new intro, there's a new outro if you ever get to the end. And yeah, I'm really excited to be bringing a different energy going into this every time. And it's great because you have been such a big part of my life in the last few months, helping me get to this new chapter. And so for me, this is such a monumental episode to also have you back for this episode and talk about our resiliency and talk about how we fucking got here.
Yes, been long roads for both of us.
Yes. And so you are now in Austin. What took you to Austin?
Well, for the past 5 years, I would say I'd been very enamored with this place. Every time I've come here, I've always felt I could live here. And that just continued. And a big part of last year was this kind of road to Austin. Like, what is it going to take to get me to get to Austin? Selling all my stuff was a big part of that. And it was hard enough as one individual to do that. I can't imagine someone with, a home and family and all that. It was incredibly hard for me just to do this one thing. So I really understand how hard it is for people to move in general. So, but coming back to the community here and the friendliness I've experienced here versus LA. So community, there's a lot of artists here. There's a really cool artist vibe here. It's much easier to talk to people. It's just everything about it is great, except for the humidity. And it's like outside. I've been calling it Saustin. It's like sauna in Austin. So if
I
you're, if
love
you're
that.
cool with like just being in a sauna all day, then great, you would love it here. So thank God for air conditioning. So yeah,
I would love it there. I love saunas.
mm, you would love it here. Yeah. So
Yeah.
now I'm
Well,
here and I'm settling in and grounding as you and I have been discussing. What it takes to ground and finding a new place and yeah, kind of like starting all over again, which is a theme a lot in my life is the starting over, specifically with career stuff in art and creating new styles of art every 7 to 10 years. So it's kind of like that.
I admire that your cycles are so long. Mine are every 6 years. I seem
Mm,
to reinvent myself and choose a new career path. And I'm like really feeling good about the one I'm on now being the one that lasts forever, the
mm,
one that I can actually build momentum behind and keep it. Um,
yes.
but 7 to 10 sounds nicer.
Yeah. And on that same note, I am definitely like, this is the one that I will ground with because it brings together everything I've done and everything I want to do. And so it starts here, starts now.
Which is great. Let's talk about that for a second. Like you are now really diving into coaching and helping artists become the artists they were born to be. That's
Mm.
powerful. What inspired you to take this avenue?
Mm. So I've been teaching online classes and in-person classes since 2008. And I was always either creating artwork or teaching. And I found that I love to be able to show someone things I take for granted, and watching people light up when they create something that I taught them in a matter of minutes or seconds. And I realized that is such an amazing gift, to give someone the gift of unleashing their own creativity just
Mm.
by changing certain ways that they think, or getting rid of old limiting beliefs, like I can't be an artist, I'm not an artist, I wasn't born an artist, like you were born an artist, you must have always known how to draw well. Like these are all myths that perpetuate the world as far as who gets to be an artist. And for
Mm.
me, I always say, well, if anyone desires to be an artist, they can be an artist. And technical abilities such as particular techniques and stuff, that is separate from the issue. If someone intends to make a piece of art, then that intention alone allows that piece of art to be called art. And over time, I think it's a consistency thing. You can't call yourself, say, a surfer if you surfed once, right? That's total
Some people
bullshit.
do.
Some people
they,
do, right?
they
And
do.
it's like, yeah, well, maybe like, I don't know, try it like 30, 40, 50 times, then call yourself a surfer. Same with art or anything else. You have to do it consistently before, you can honestly and authentically call yourself that thing. But for artists, I feel that we're all naturally born creators, because when you look at children, they naturally create. They're always doing crayons or paints, or they're making a mess, and they're either playing or creating, or some kind of combination of both. And then something happens in life where, say, a parent or the parents say, it's time to grow up, like you can't keep doing this art thing, like no artist makes money. So that's a
Mm.
myth that is implanted in the child's head, that robs them of that love and creativity that they have. And I love the possibility of me introducing that love back into their lives.
Mm. And I can speak from personal experience having worked with you. I mean, take this as my testimony, everybody, that really hanging out with you and the art sessions we would have. I, I mean, I used to paint, sort of. I say like I used to paint. I guess I could still paint. I'm not dead yet. But my biggest fear was always putting a mark on the canvas that I would regret. And so I had so many unfinished paintings. I think I only ever finished like two. And one of them was just like real simple. It was just like this rain with a little like outline of a man in the corner. And I called it Because of Man. And it was a representation that in my life only men just made me sad all the time.
Mm.
And I had another one that was like all these M&Ms, all yellow M&Ms with a red one in the middle. And it said something about like dare to be different, and but I've been so scared to make art, and I didn't know how. And got on your lives, and I was watching you like smudge things around and erase things. And I was like, I didn't know you could do that with art. No one taught me that. I thought marks were permanent. And so, yeah, I started hanging out with you, and you started opening up this creative flow inside of me. And it really has brought out a new level of expression for me that I didn't realize I was keeping so tied down tightly, especially in the form of like moving my hand on paper. And just like how fun it is to get messy with crayons and pencils. And so, yeah, there's definitely an incredible gift you have to empower people to get out of their own way, to get out of the box, this construct that they put themselves in, that they are not an artist or they can't make art, and allow that flowing again.
Yes.
It's quite a gift, my friend.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you for seeing that.
And at what point were you ever told that, like, no, you shouldn't be an artist? I feel like that's where
Mm.
most people kind of get cut off. And did that ever happen to you?
It, yeah, it happened, but thankfully not with my parents or anyone I was growing up around. I feel that when that happens at a very young age, it really will stop that that artist from developing. So thankfully, my mom was very supportive, and my dad, they were like, you want to draw, just keep drawing. Here's pencils and paper, and they just let me do it. There was no art classes or anything like that, but
Mm.
they just let me do it, which was great. It's like they let the plant grow, and they watered it with, words of affection, even though the drawings were total shit, as all kids' drawings. It's all shit. The parents are proud of it. They put them on the fridge, and the parents save the drawings. And there's something powerful about creating a piece of art and as an extension of yourself. So when that is prohibited especially a young person, you're stopping them from developing in a certain way, and that will then show up negatively somewhere else. So where people did not stop me. So one particular thing, I was about 18 years old. I was going to this training program. I thought I was pretty good. That was my 18-year-old arrogance. And this guy coming in from Disney looking at my portfolio, and he was like, son, you have a long way to go. And it was just like this sinking, like, oh my God, what does he mean by, like, how long? He was basically telling me, like, I'm not good enough to get into Disney. And this was after my rejection from art college, about a year before that. And I thought
Oh,
I'd made
shit.
strides. Yeah. And here's this other guy, the Disney recruiter portfolio guy, telling me I had a long way to go, very cryptically. And I was like, oh my God, there that is again. And that happened many times on different jobs where I would get fired for either being too slow. So eventually I got good enough, but then my speed wasn't good, right? So there's all these things that uh, potentially could have derailed my art career, but they really essentially fueled them, because there is a bit of, well, I call it healthy spite. Like, I'm going to show them. I'm going to show them. I'm going to prove to them that I can do this thing because they said no. I'm going to make them say yes eventually. And so that fueled me and propelled me into just becoming better and better. And I feel we really need that in our lives, not just with art, but with anything. We need honest people who have the, let's say, credentials to back up their authority on what they're saying, to tell us things that we absolutely need to hear. Otherwise, we will not grow. So I'm thankful for the times when I was told no.
I think that applies across all different avenues of life.
Mhm.
I would imagine it feels extra hard to hear in terms of art because it's something
Mm.
so personal.
Yeah.
But let's go backwards. So wait, you got rejected from art college for
Mhm.
Disney. It was like some funneling into Disney. You got rejected.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what did that feel like?
Oh, it was absolutely horrible because I was just so confident. Again, the arrogance of a 17-year-old. And because for me, I identified as an artist. I'd been drawing my entire life, ever since I was 3 years old. So this was, 14 years of drawing experience going into this portfolio, which was then rejected from this school. And so for me, it was like my identity was shattered. And I
Mm.
was embarrassed too, because all my friends are like, dude, you're going to this school because you're an artist and you're a real artist. And I had so much support, my family, and like, and then I had to tell everyone like I didn't get in. It was just like, oh my God. Like I still
Mm.
feel the pain of that 17-year-old kid. It was like, okay, I'm still going to do this. I don't know how, I don't know where. I'm still going to Disney. I'm not going to go this way. And I ended up finding other avenues that got me um, into the world of animation. And I didn't end up working for Disney as an animator, but I did work for Disney as a conceptual artist. So we can talk about that.
Yeah, which
It's
is
not
even
what-
better, right? Like,
Yeah, in a way, yeah, because years later, I'd heard that working for Disney as an animator was a very grueling and tough job. Basically, I was talked out of it while being on The Simpsons, because on The Simpsons, we ended up having so many Disney animators come from Disney to The Simpsons. I'm like, why are you leaving? That's Mecca. Why are you coming here to this shit show? And they're like, dude, no, it's not. Disney is not what you think it is. They'll run you into the ground. You'll never advance up to higher levels of animator positions. And that's why they came to The Simpsons, because
Mm.
Disney wasn't a good place to work. So in some ways, I was saved from working at Disney by being rejected from this school. So,
Yeah, and that happens so much in life, right? Like we think that this one thing that is so detrimental and devastating is like the end all for our lives. And really, it's just sort of course correcting our boat in a different
mm,
direction. You love your
yes,
boat analogies.
yes.
Course correcting us into a different direction that may force us either to tap into resiliency and to build that, to really learn that, especially at a young age like that.
Mm,
Or yeah. So, how was it working for The Simpsons then?
mm. So let's back up to, it was the year 1989 when,
Oh boy,
geez, remember that year? I mean, were you
you
even
started
born yet?
working at The Simpsons in '89?
No, no.
Barely.
No, I was in seventh grade, and I remember going to a mall, and I saw a Simpsons like cutout thing. It was this giant thing, and I remember vividly seeing that, and it was like the Simpsons TV show coming out, and I remember seeing it, and I was like, I was upset, I was angry, um, in a way that I was like, I could draw better than that shit. And that shit has got its own poster, and that's going to be a show. And so my first impression of the Simpsons was anger,
Mm.
uh, because I thought they were just shitty drawings. But again, there was my seventh grade arrogance coming in. Like, I'm better than that. I'm better than that. So, and then 7 years later or so, I got the job on The Simpsons. And when I first applied to The Simpsons, the little training program that I was at, they told us all, hey guys, The Simpsons are taking interns. And I remember thinking, fuck that. Like, I'm a Disney artist. I'm not going to The Simpsons. That's like underneath me. That's beneath. So again, the arrogance of that kid. And so the owners of the program, they said, well, what else do you got? And what do you got to lose? Why don't you just submit your portfolio? And if they say no, then you're not going to go. But why not? Because there's nothing else going on right now. So
Right. You
I
don't even
kind
have a
of did.
choice unless they say
I
yes.
know. I didn't. So I'm like, fine. I'll submit my portfolio for the internship on The Simpsons. Like begrudgingly, I'm like, I don't want this. This is bullshit. And then I got in, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like at least they saw me, right? So it immediately, like, I just fell in love with like the show because, well, they saw me and they let me in, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start thinking differently about the show. And I immediately fell in love with the show and immediately fell in love with the crew. And yeah, it was an amazing experience for a 19-year-old to become an intern on this huge show was enough. And it was a paid internship of like $400 a week, which was like, to a 19-year-old kid in 1995, like,
Shit.
get this job that's paid on this hit show. We'll talk about arrogance. It just fueled a different kind of arrogance. I just became like, yeah, I'm a Simpsons animator now. And I was proud of it. And we were all young, crazy kids on the show. And it was such an amazing experience. And I'm so glad I'm able to share this with you, because not a lot of people hear about the experience that I had. And now in this stage in life, I look forward to telling more people about this experience, because it's a fun story to tell. So we'll definitely get into some of that.
Yeah. Well, it's a radical experience. And just for comparison, like in 2012, I became an office PA on my first show, and I was only making 650 a week. So like your $400, like what is, I can't even do the math on that. Like almost 20 years prior, like was
Yeah.
making bank as an intern.
Yeah. And I was still living at home, and my mom just bought me a car, and I'm like, fuck, I got all this money. And like, so that was a whole other I had no financial advisors, and I just was reckless with my money. But, you give a 19-year-old that much money and time and status. Oh my God. Yeah.
Mm. And so, was it like a dream job now that you're animating for The Simpsons?
Mhm.
What was it actually like?
Yeah, it slowly started becoming like this dream job because as an animator on The Simpsons, we were doing what's called key animation, which is the main drawings, right? Um, you hear this term called in betweening a lot, and so many people understand this concept when they say, "Don't you have to draw every little movement?" Yeah, you do, but we didn't do that. We would do the main drawings, right? So if Homer's drinking a beer, right, we would do one drawing where the beer's on the table, another drawing where it's here, and then another drawing with the head tilted back. That's 3 drawings. We would have to time those on these mathematical sheets, and those drawings were then sent to South Korea, and they would have to fill in all of the little blanks, which is why
No
it took
way.
6 to 8 months to make one episode. One episode took
Holy shit.
that long, which is wild, right? Even to this day, it's like, wow. I think it's maybe like 4 months now because it's all digital, but still, it's a long time.
That's insane. They like to think they had to factor in putting it in boxes and putting it probably on a boat and sending it over there. Like, Jesus. And you've shared with
Yeah,
me some stories about what it was they did in Korea, because then they had to scan all these images in, and there's just like someone in a dungeon like pushing a button that scans like every single image.
it was very archaic, and the technology used was very primitive. But looking back, it was just so, there's nostalgia for whenever you look back. But looking back, this was the time before internet. There was no cell phones. We had telephones. We had TV. So it was a very focused time where everyone, like, they knew what they had to do, and like if you were an animator on The Simpsons, like you knew what you were animating, and there was a lot of, I guess, presence compared to now, which is we're just so distracted. There's distractions everywhere.
Hmm. And what inspired you to want to move on from The Simpsons?
Mm. Well, I would say after being there for about 8.5 years, I was like, fuck this show.
Comes full circle again.
Yeah, I had the 7-year itch, but at 8.5 years in. So I was like, okay, I need to get out of here. But like, I don't know what else. I couldn't draw anything else. That was my thinking. I don't know how to draw anything else other than The Simpsons. Why? Because that's all I've been drawing. And so I'm like, well, I can't go to Disney. I can't show them my Simpson portfolio. And I remember, so if we back up a little bit, not applying to Disney, but I was still holding out some hope to go to Disney. And I went to this kind of a art convention where Disney was there and my company was there, and we were just there showing what we did and all that. And I remember going to the Disney booth, and I said, "Yeah, I would like to talk to you guys about applying as an animator. Like, who do I talk to?" And the woman was like, "Talk to me."
Ooh.
I'm like, "Okay, great. I am working on The Simpsons now, and I would like to." And she was like, we don't really consider The Simpsons art. So, yeah, she said that to me. And I'm
Oh my
like,
God.
I was like, oh, well, I mean, I forget what I said, but like, I've come up with many things over the years. Like, so I was getting defensive. Like, of course, The Simpsons is art. I'm a fucking badass animator. Like, I can draw like a motherfucker. Like, of course, I was thinking all this. I couldn't say it, but that was like the nail in the coffin of Disney animation for me. I'm like, fuck Disney. The stories are all true. A lot of them are arrogant, and they consider art to be, well, the art that they want to see. And what I'm doing is not art. And yeah, so I was like, fuck Disney, fuck all you. What do I do now? So
Mhm.
I saw a position for an illustrator for The Simpsons. So one of the job requirements was must have minimum 7 years experience as an animator on The Simpsons. I'm like, boom, that's me.
Only
And
hiring from within.
yeah, and it was a position at Fox. It would be a totally complete move. And it was for specifically the director of illustration for Fox license and merchandise department. I'm like, what the fuck does any of that mean? I just need a new job and I'll do whatever. So going in for the interviews and they were like, well, you're obviously an illustrator. You're applying for an illustrator position. I'm like, yeah, I'm an illustrator. Like I wasn't an illustrator, but
What's
I
the
could
difference
draw.
between an illustrator and an animator?
I
Or you're
mean, at the
not?
time, I didn't know. I had no idea. I'm like, I can draw the Simpsons moving or I can draw them still. And so an illustration is a still image. So I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, I'll do still images with the Simpsons. Let's go. So I basically created an entirely new portfolio of like still Simpsons drawings. And that got me the job. So
Nice. I'm
yeah. And I was
surprised that they were like, as an animator who draws images that then like get combined to make a moving image, you're not capable of drawing one image.
right.
Like the backwards thinking Hollywood
Yeah.
has sometimes is like mind-boggling.
Yeah, and this was a perfect situation of like, fake it till I make it kind of thing. Like I told
Mm,
them I could do it even though I had no experience, and I showed them in a portfolio that I could do what they were asking for. And yeah, that was an amazing transition. So that got me out of animation and then into still imagery, so illustration. That's why I started to learn this thing called concept art, which is all the artwork they made for movies before the movie is made. They would create
mm,
countless images of the look and feel of the movie in order to either sell the movie or give it to their team of animators or production artists as basically a blueprint of the movie. They're like, this is what the movie is going to feel like when it's done according to this piece of concept art. And so when I found out about that was a job, it's like, I have to do this. Like, where do I go? Like, what is even. And then I found out about computer painting. I'm like, you can paint on the computer? Like, what the fuck? I had no idea. I was all pencil and paper up to that point.
living in a cave.
Totally. So it was just like this learning to walk again. Like, this was like, oh my God. And then I was seeing what these artists were creating in the computer. And I'm like, how do you even like, where do you even start? And so it was like learning to walk again was how I described that experience.
Hmm. And how would you describe art? What does art mean to you?
Mm, yeah. So I think that the basic definition of art is if something is intended to be art, then it's art. So if someone has an intention to say, I'm going to make a piece of art and I'm going to put it up on the wall and I'm going to call it art, that's art. And that's a very limited view of it because I can be walking on the street and see a beautifully lit scene that was not created as art. Like imagine you're walking down the street, you see like a dumpster with like a street light shining on it, and maybe there's some flowers there, and there's trash bags, and like I see everything as art. Everywhere I look is this thing that people call art because I see the beauty in the way things are lit. I see the beauty in the colors and the textures. So for me, everything is art, including human beings. There's art
Hmm.
everywhere. And so it's very subjective also. What someone considers art, someone else considers shit, and vice versa. So very subjective and very personal, but it is essentially a created thing, or even in some cases it's uncreated. It's how we look at the world, right? So there's so much that can be said about what art is or what art isn't, and it's open to such massive interpretation that I've given up defining it, except for me.
Well, I love that definition though of anything that someone intended to be art is
Yeah,
art.
yeah.
That's like just the most beautiful breakdown I can imagine because there's so many things I've created where I'm like, it's art. I put it on the wall. Like literally have something right next to me on the wall here. Then I'm like, it's art. I saw someone else selling it on Etsy, so I made it myself.
Yeah,
And
exactly. And again, it's very subjective. One person's taste is going to be different to the other person. So, the definition of good or bad, that's a separate issue. That those are more technical, um, and also subjective personal preferences about what is good art, right?
Mm,
It's completely subjective.
absolutely. And so psychedelics are also a part of your world.
Hmm.
And do they, well, I know the answer to this. I know they influence your art now. I mean, how do they not, especially when you've been in that psychedelic space? But at what point did you start doing psychedelics, and how then did it change your art?
Well, yeah, I started pretty young. It's about 16 when I first took LSD. And since then, I was like, wow, there's this thing you could take that could affect the way you see the world and affect the way you feel about the world, and can also enhance the creative experience.
Mm.
You know, drawing while on LSD at 16 years old, I'm like, this is amazing. This is, I want to do this a lot. And so it started pretty young. Yeah.
Yeah. And so something that you've prepared for today are some things that you animated or drew or illustrated
Illustrated.
for, okay, that you illustrated for The Simpsons, where they had psychedelic moments on the show. Or so
Yes.
tell me about those.
Yeah. So, well, in the Simpsons world, there's so many references to psychedelics, and um, it's pretty rampant. The writers, wherever they can find a place to write in a line about drugs, like they will. And these guys aren't like psychedelics, or psychonauts. They're actually not. They're not at all that way. The artists on the show, we were all the psychonauts and the stoners and all that. The writers were, Ivy League, Harvard guys that, they, I think they maybe drank at the most, but
Mm,
they knew, they had their pulse on society and culture, um, to such a vast degree. You might have heard about the writers of The Simpsons predicting the future. Like that's kind of like a big
yes.
thing. Those are, and they had to think in terms of. Remember when I said that it would take 6 months to make an episode?
It's
So they would
insane.
have to think, what is going to be popular now in 6 months, right? If I write something now, will it be popular in 6 months? And they didn't stop there. They're like, well, what's going to be happening 10 years from now? So their discussions with each other were like, what has happened in the past, all the way back since mankind got here, all the way to the potential future of mankind. Like, this is how these guys thought. Brilliant, brilliant thinkers. And so going to psychedelics, they would throw those in because they like to just have fun with their writing and make fun of people, and just make people laugh. And psychedelics was a way to uh, get humor and wild visuals into the show. And so as the animators, we loved whenever they wrote anything related to illegal drug use. Yeah.
So show me what you got. So for those
Right.
of you who are just listening, Alex is going to pull up a still from what?
Okay. Okay. So this really sums up my entire Simpsons experience in one image, which is
What?
great.
Wow.
So I created this image. So let me give you a little bit of backstory. This is from an episode where Homer ends up eating a handful of what are called Guatemalan insanity peppers at the chili cook-off.
They were
So you see it,
Guatemalan.
Guatemalan, yeah.
I love Guatemala.
That's specific. So you can see on the left where Homer's under the sign and he's popping one of the chilies, and then he eats a few of them, and then he starts hallucinating, and then he goes on this really wild psychedelic experience for a good part of the episode. And to me, it was a great episode, and I also worked on the episode as well because it was so visually just captivating and just wild, and like And of course, they were talking about, they were talking about psychedelics and all of that, except these were peppers, right? They found a way
Hmm.
to have Homer trip his balls off, like by eating peppers. Like, that's amazing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
I
so I
love
remember
that, like, one of the middle images is like Homer with just his pupils so dilated.
exactly. So this episode, I remember when I was working on it and I was doing some animation of Ned Flanders and all of his mouths, and it was such a wild episode. And I thought this episode is going to be very popular, and I love it. I know my friends are going to love it, and it's just going to be around for a long time. People are going to talk about it a lot, and so fast forward 5, 6 years later, when I am the director of illustration at Fox, and they were thinking, okay, we want to create a cell, which is essentially what an animation cell is. If you look at Homer, right, all the Homers, everything there's
Mm.
a separation between the background and Homer, right? And so those were called cells. It's short for celluloid. It was basically a piece of plastic that the character was drawn and painted on to go over the background, right? So if you think of
Mm.
like layers in Photoshop, that's what
So it gives it like
cells.
multiple dimensions when you're looking at it. So it's like one of those
Exactly.
framed art pieces someone would buy that
Yep.
has all that cool dimension to it.
Exactly. Exactly. So when they asked me to, if I had any ideas for a giant cell, like they wanted to make a big one. And I was like, and I totally was joking. I'm like, remember that time where Homer ate those peppers and like tripped his balls off? And my boss was like, that's it. That's brilliant. Make that. Make that. And that was all I needed to be like, okay, I'm going to now create this epic composition that encapsulates this one episode that is so dear to my heart, and dear to so many people's hearts, especially psychonauts, and
Hmm.
just create this thing from starting out with drawings, getting approval from Matt Groening, the creator of the show. He's very involved in the products and all that, and working all the way to the end to the with the cell creators. This image here I created entirely myself in Photoshop to give that cell kind of look.
Wow.
And then they created the whole thing, which was massive. It was 3-4 feet across, and yeah. And so they gave me one as a gift. I'm like, hell yeah. And
Oh,
then
cool.
gave it to our friend Chris Hager, and it's hanging up in his kid's romper room.
Oh, I was wondering how Chris came to have this exact piece that you actually did.
Yes. Chris holds a lot of, he's creating a museum. He's told me this, of my art. He owns more of
Oh,
my
really?
art than anyone else. So it has a very good home.
Cool. Oh, I want to make that museum with him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well,
You got some too.
I do. I've got a few pieces in here. I love too that you honored the Mayan culture in Guatemala with the temple, like the pyramid in the background, um,
Yeah.
and it worked in
Yeah.
some
There's
of
lots of
their
cool little, yeah, lots of cool little Easter eggs in here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Marge is like
How,
standing on the top of it, looking off into the cosmos, like she's
yeah.
waiting for aliens, which is
Yeah.
just very appropriate of all indigenous cultures.
Very appropriate. Yes. Hmm.
Cool. How many other times did Homer chirp his face off?
Wow. Okay, so there is quite a few episodes where there were large parts of the episodes where either it was Homer or um, Barney or Krusty, or in one situation, the entire town of Springfield was high on some kind of thing that Homer accidentally unleashed onto the town. So there's more than I think, but um, it's interesting how wherever the writers could put in a reference to drug use, they would. Of course, alcohol is a big thing in Springfield. Homer is a big drinker and all that, but there was an episode where Homer, he gets medicinal marijuana, and then
Ooh.
he just becomes this total stoner, and he hangs out in the attic, and Otto, the stoner bus driver, would come over and hang out, and like Homer's eyes would be just bloodshot red. And of course Marge was like not okay with it, but he's like, hey, this is medicine, baby, I need this. And
Oh
so
my gosh.
Mm.
Oh God, I love it. Obviously I love psychedelics, plant medicines, and there's so much to unlock there, and
Mm.
so many beautiful things that we get to create in that space where I'm a really big believer that the plant medicines and psychedelics, they allow us to remember the things that we came into these human bodies on this earth to forget, so that we could learn things and we could have new experiences. But the psychedelics help us remember. And in that remembering, for many of us, it gives us a place to heal,
Mm.
and it gives us a place to feel safer and more connected. And from that safety and connection, now, you know, what happened in my life was that I felt more capable of living in this three-dimensional reality, knowing that this isn't all that there is. And there's all these things that we forgot, that like, cool, there's a place we go after this, and it's going to be pretty sweet when we get there. And gives gives me more hope personally, and being able to work with others to channel that for them, and the things that we can download and receive, and change how we think in that space as well. It's
Mm.
just so powerful.
Very, very.
What is one of your most powerful psychedelic experiences? How about recent psychedelic experiences?
Yeah. So, well, speaking of our friend Chris, and you were there as well for this very powerful intramuscular ketamine session. Definitely the most powerful in the past couple of years. And yeah, still, it takes a while to process these things sometimes. And that's the whole
Mm-hmm.
integration of it. Sometimes you will remember something from an experience months later, even years later. It's like remembering a part of a dream. You're like, I did experience that. I felt that. I was in this place. And so that experience was so profound and still is whenever I think about it. And then you had sent me the other day the what happens to the brain after a very profound ketamine experience.
Mm.
And I mean, I'm an absolute believer. It's a very powerful medicine, not to be used lightly, but um, that is just something that is. It's even hard to explain. And so, a lot of the ketamine art that you've seen me create is me attempting to try to explain what a deep ketamine experience is like.
Oh shit,
And yeah,
that's
and I've
tough.
looked forward to doing much more exploration because it is just this infinite. I call it like a portal, like a portals to portals. It seems like is what ketamine is. So how would you
Mm-hmm.
visualize that? Doorways and stairs and like getting into like MC Escher where you have doors and worlds that are upside down that are up here, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, it's an illustrator's playground to be able to illustrate the psychedelic experience, and because they all have their unique visual signature to it, and it's fun as an artist to be able to decode those and actually bring them back into reality once the experience is over.
Yeah. And I'm glad you bring up that specific journey. That was a really big one for me too. And there were things I experienced there that I've never experienced on ketamine before. Specifically, this like intense peace. There were some
Mm.
other beings there on my end who came and greeted us and kind of just like welcomed us to the resort of relaxation. And I was like, that's not usually how this goes. Um, but ketamine has so many varying layers to it. And I I wish that more people could have access to regulating their own medicines as they need them. The same way that, like, if you're sick, you have vitamin C in your cabinet, you can go take it. The same way that if your muscles are sore, or your leg hurts, you can go take some ibuprofen because that's what you need for today. And maybe you need it a couple days in a row. Maybe you need a mushroom supplement to get your brain firing. Maybe you need a supplement to help you sleep. Maybe you need a little bit of ketamine because what you've got going on in your brain is so freaking out of control that day that you could just use a little help. in the same way that we use so many other tools to just give us a little help.
Mm.
Um, and I like, for me, for instance, right now, I've got a lot going on in my brain, and it's just to be able to have access to my own medicine, to regulate myself, to go, I, I got to stop. I got to go about my day. And I've given what I'm feeling time and space. And then it's like, now I also have to be an adult. I have to be a responsible adult. And
Mm.
I have to hop on this interview, or I have to go drive up to Los Angeles after this. And like, to get some peace of mind that enables
Mm.
me to not completely unravel today. For instance, I mean, guys, we're coaches, but we don't always have it all figured out either. But
Mm.
what we do have figured out better than we did 10 years ago was how to use tools, what tools to call upon. And I look forward to the day when more people understand and can figure out how to regulate for themselves. And ketamine
Mm.
has a broad bandwidth. In small doses, it's like it's just like a little bit of an antidepressant, but it almost just sort of stops all the noise in its tracks. And in even a little bit bigger dosage, I'm noticing it's like this direct connection to your higher consciousness. And in even
Mm.
bigger doses, it becomes that massive portal that we're talking about. So it's like, what's happening there? And I think that same image I sent you about what ketamine does to the brain, something that kind of broke my heart was that in reading the caption at the bottom of it, they were like, this is so important to understand how the disassociation works so that we can turn it into a pill and end depression for good. And I
Mm.
went, ah,
Mhm.
shit. I don't believe in taking a pill to be the end depression for good pill, because you're just putting a band-aid on. It's like
Right.
trying to put a band-aid on an artery that's bleeding out. Like, I'm going to
Mhm.
stop the bleeding a little bit, but eventually you got to address the fact that you're bleeding out.
Mhm.
And I don't
Yeah.
believe that there's one cure all for depression, anxiety, PTSD. And I personally lived through much depression, and that is one of my biggest struggles that I still work to navigate away from anytime times get tough. And
Mm.
having those tools is beautiful, but they should be that, tools, not
Exactly.
band-aids.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Mm.
Well, and so now you have a coaching program that you're launching, specifically a Procreate course to learn how to draw on your iPad. That is
Mm.
coming up. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So Procreate is an app on the iPad. It's made only for the iPad. And for me, it is such, speaking of tools, it is such an amazing tool for creativity that doesn't require really any experience to start playing with, meaning there is no setup, there's no mess, there's no, let's say you have an inclination to play with colors right away. This is perfect for that. If you just want to sketch characters, if you want to do simple animations, if you want to do a book cover illustration, I mean, the range that this program is able to produce is pretty infinite. And so I've been playing with this program for about 5 years now, and I felt, hey, it was time to create a little course for it, because I get so many questions on what is this program? How can I get better at it? What can I create in it? And so that's Adventures in Procreate. It's going to be a really fun, playful, yet very educational. I don't want to say introduction. It's an 8-week course, 8 hours, right? Um, as a way to get people excited about creating digital art. And everything I teach in this course will then be able to be applied to traditional work. So, whatever you work with, say pastels or watercolors or anything like that, everything I teach has a duality to it, meaning if I teach traditionally, you can apply that in the digital world and
Mm.
vice versa. So, at the end of the day, these are all just tools and surfaces, right? The tool is Procreate, the surface is the iPad. I always say, give me a rock and a wall, and I'll get you something amazing out of it. And I've done that before. I've created pieces of art with a rock on a wall. And that shows the power of creativity, the creative mind. And those are the ideas I really look forward to teaching, because the technical stuff and Procreate and all of that stuff, that's the easier part. But it's more of how an artist sees the world is what I'm excited to teach.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds great. We'll have that linked up in the show notes for
Awesome.
anyone who wants to join. I have just been a student of yours for the last several months and just can't rave about you enough. And I
Mm.
love the wisdom that comes along with what you teach as well. And so it's, it's really always more than just an art lesson with you. And that's, to me, what makes you so different from all the other art coaches out there.
Mm. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can my listeners keep up with you?
You can find me on Instagram, alexruiz.artist. And my coaching educational program is called Infinite Artist. So that's infiniteartist.net. And you can also see my illustration work and my concept stuff on alexruiz.art.
Awesome. We will have that all linked up in the show notes. And thank you so much for another episode and honoring me on my 1 year anniversary with your
Congratulations.
art. Yeah. Thank you. We made it to number 40. Woohoo.
Woo-hoo! Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.